The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Rebecca Stone stepped out of her small blue house and walked toward her silver Honda Civic. It was February 14th, 2018, and the 19-year-old had a spring in her step that matched the optimism she carried everywhere she went. Valentine's Day was always special for Rebecca, but this year felt different. She was just 3 weeks away from graduating from beauty school, and her future seemed brighter than ever. Rebecca had always been the kind of person who lit up a room when she entered. Her friends often said she had a smile that could cure the worst day, and her laugh was so infectious that even strangers found themselves grinning when they heard it. She stood about 5 feet 4 inches tall, with long brown hair that she often wore in different styles as practice from her classes. Her green eyes sparkled with kindness, and she had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world when she spoke to them. Growing up in Millfield, Virginia, Rebecca had learned the value of hard work and community from an early age. The town itself was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where neighbors helped each other without being asked, and where high school football games brought the entire community together on Friday nights. With a population of just under 8,000 people, Millfield was small enough that Rebecca could walk downtown and wave to at least a dozen people she knew well. Her childhood home on Maple Street was modest, but filled with love. Rebecca lived there with her mother, Linda Stone, a nurse at the local hospital who had raised Rebecca mostly on her own after her divorce from Robert Stone when Rebecca was 12 years old. Despite the divorce, Robert remained an active part of Rebecca's life. He lived in the neighboring town of Riverside, about 20 minutes away, and made sure to attend every important event in his daughter's life. Linda Stone often told her friends that Rebecca was the best thing that had ever happened to her. The single mother had worked double shifts at the hospital for years to make sure Rebecca could participate in dance classes, school trips, and all the activities that made childhood special. Rebecca never took her mother's sacrifices for granted. Even as a teenager, she helped with household chores without being asked, and often surprised her mother with her favorite coffee from the local shop. Rebecca's boyfriend, Marcus Williams, had been part of her life since their junior year of high school. Marcus was 20 years old and worked at his family's hardware store in downtown Millfield. He was the kind of young man that parents approved of: steady, reliable, and clearly devoted to Rebecca. The couple had been talking about getting engaged after Rebecca finished beauty school and found a job. Marcus had even started saving money for a ring, though Rebecca didn't know about that yet. Their relationship was the kind that made other couples jealous in the best way possible. They supported each other's dreams, rarely argued, and seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time together. Marcus would often pick Rebecca up from her classes at the Valley Beauty Institute, and they would go for coffee or take long walks through the town park. On weekends, they would often double date with their friends or spend quiet evenings watching movies at Rebecca's house with her mother. The Valley Beauty Institute had become Rebecca's second home over the past year. Located in 9D, a renovated building in downtown Millfield, the school was small but well regarded in the region. Rebecca had always been interested in hair and makeup, often experimenting with different looks on herself and her friends throughout high school. When she decided to pursue cosmetology as a career, her family and friends were not surprised. It seemed like a perfect fit for someone who loved making others feel beautiful and confident. Rebecca's instructors at the beauty school, particularly Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, often praised her natural talent and dedication. She had a gentle touch that clients loved, and she possessed an artistic eye that made her particularly skilled at color work and cutting. More importantly, Rebecca had the kind of personality that made clients feel comfortable and welcome. She genuinely cared about people and remembered personal details about their lives, asking about their children or jobs during appointments. The young woman's dream was to open her own salon someday, maybe in Millfield, or perhaps in the larger city. About an hour away, she had already started sketching ideas for the layout and thinking about names. Rebecca often talked about creating a place where women could come not just for hair and beauty services, but where they could feel relaxed and pampered. She wanted to offer affordable services so that all the women in her community could access quality beauty care. Beyond her studies and relationship, Rebecca was deeply involved in her community. Every Saturday morning, She volunteered at the Millfield Animal Shelter, helping to bathe dogs, clean kennels, and socialize with cats who needed extra attention. The shelter staff adored Rebecca because she never minded the messy work and always stayed late if an animal needed extra care. She had a special way with scared or injured animals, often spending extra time just sitting quietly with them until they felt safe. Rebecca also helped her elderly neighbors whenever she could. Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 houses down from Rebecca, often found her garbage cans brought in from the curb without having to ask. Mr. Thompson, the widower across the street, discovered that his sidewalk was mysteriously shoveled after every snowfall. Rebecca never wanted credit for these small acts of kindness. When people tried to thank her, she would just smile and say that neighbors should help each other. The Valentine's Day morning that would change everything started like any other day for Rebecca. She had gotten up early to wash and style her hair, wanting to look special for her date with Marcus that evening. They had planned to go to Antonio's, the nicest Italian restaurant in town, and Marcus had been acting mysteriously excited about something for the past week. Rebecca suspected he might be planning to propose, though she tried not to get her hopes up too much. At breakfast, Linda Stone had given Rebecca a pair of small diamond earrings that had belonged to Rebecca's grandmother. They were meant to be an early graduation gift, but Linda couldn't wait to see Rebecca's reaction. The young woman had tears in her eyes as she hugged her mother, promising to treasure them always. She put the earrings on immediately and admired them in the hallway mirror before leaving for school. As Rebecca drove toward the Valley Beauty Institute that morning, she was thinking about her future. In 3 weeks, she would graduate and could start working as a licensed cosmetologist. Marcus seemed ready to propose. Her relationship with both of her parents was strong. Everything in her life was falling into place exactly as she had hoped and dreamed. The radio was playing her favorite song as she pulled into the parking lot of the beauty school. Rebecca sang along, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel and thinking about how lucky she was. She had no way of knowing that this ordinary Tuesday morning would be the last normal day of her life, and that by evening, her name would become known throughout Virginia for all the wrong reasons. Rebecca Stone grabbed her books and purse from the passenger seat, locked her car, and walked toward the building where she had spent the happiest year of her life, learning the trade she loved. She waved to a few classmates in the parking lot and called out a cheerful good morning. Her diamond earrings caught the sunlight as she moved, sparkling like tiny stars. Within hours, that same parking lot would become a crime scene, and Rebecca Stone would become the center of a mystery that would haunt Millfield forever. The afternoon sun was beginning to set behind the mountains when Rebecca Stone walked out of the Valley Beauty Institute for the last time. It was 3:30 p.m. on February 14th, 2018, and she had just finished her final class of the day. Rebecca felt tired but happy as she said goodbye to her classmates and instructors. She had spent the morning practicing advanced cutting techniques and the afternoon learning about salon management. Every day brought her closer to her dream of opening her own business. Rebecca pulled her cell phone from her purse as she walked across the parking lot toward her silver Honda Civic. The phone rang twice before Marcus Williams answered with his usual cheerful greeting. She could hear the sounds of the hardware store in the background as he spoke to her while organizing inventory. "Hey, beautiful. How was school today?" Marcus asked, and Rebecca could hear the smile in his voice, even through the phone. "It was great. Mrs. Rodriguez said my layered cut was perfect today. I think I'm really getting the hang of this," Rebecca replied, fishing through her purse for her car keys while balancing the phone against her shoulder. Marcus laughed softly. "I never doubted it for a second. You're going to be the best hairdresser this town has ever seen. Are you still excited about tonight?" Rebecca found her keys and unlocked her car door. "Of course I am. I've been looking forward to our Valentine's dinner all week. You've been so mysterious about it." "Should I be worried?" she teased as she got into the driver's seat. "Just wear something nice and be ready for the best Valentine's Day ever," Marcus said. Rebecca could hear his boss calling him in the background. "I have to go help a customer with some lumber, but I'll pick you up at 7 sharp. I love you." "I love you too." "See you tonight," Rebecca said, ending the call with a smile on her face. The security cameras at the Valley Beauty Institute captured Rebecca's car, leaving the parking lot at exactly 3:47 p.m. She had to wait for another student's car to move before she could pull out onto Main Street. The footage showed Rebecca waving to someone through her window, though investigators would later be unable to determine who she was waving to. Rebecca's route home should have taken her 15 minutes. She typically drove straight down Main Street through the center of town, then turned left onto Elm Avenue, which led directly to Maple Street where she lived. The drive was simple and familiar. She had made the same trip hundreds of times over the past year. At 4:15 p.m., Rebecca's mother, Linda Stone, was preparing an early dinner at home. She had gotten off work from the hospital early and wanted to cook something special for Rebecca before her Valentine's date. Linda was making Rebecca's favorite chicken casserole, the same recipe her own mother had taught her years ago. She kept glancing at the clock, expecting to hear Rebecca's car pull into the driveway at any moment. By 4:45 p.m., Linda started to worry. Rebecca was never this late without calling. The beauty school was only 15 minutes away, and Rebecca had left over an hour ago. Linda tried calling Rebecca's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried calling again 5 minutes later with the same result. Meanwhile, Marcus Williams was closing up the hardware store and getting ready for what he hoped would be the most important evening of his life. Hidden in his bedroom at home was a small velvet box containing his grandmother's engagement ring. He had been planning this proposal for months, choosing Valentine's Day because he knew how much Rebecca loved romantic gestures. Marcus had made reservations at Antonio's restaurant for 7:30 p.m. He had specifically requested the corner table by the window, where he and Rebecca had shared their first official date 3 years earlier. The restaurant manager, Tony Marcelli, had known Marcus since he was a child and had promised to make the evening extra special. At 6:30 p.m., Marcus arrived at Rebecca's house on Maple Street. He was wearing his best suit and carrying a bouquet of red roses. Linda Stone answered the door, and Marcus immediately knew something was wrong. Rebecca's mother looked worried and confused. "Marcus, thank goodness you're here. Rebecca never came home from school today. I've been calling her phone for over an hour, but it just goes to voicemail. This isn't like her at all," Linda said, wringing her hands nervously. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Rebecca was the most reliable person he knew. She never disappeared without explanation, and she always answered her phone when her mother called. "Did you call the school? Maybe she stayed late for extra practice or something," Marcus suggested, though even as he said it, he knew Rebecca would have called. "I called there first. Mrs. Rodriguez said Rebecca left right on time at 3:30. She seemed fine and was talking about her date tonight," Linda replied. Her voice was starting to shake with worry. Marcus and Linda decided to retrace Rebecca's normal route home. They got in Marcus's truck and drove slowly down Main Street, looking for any sign of Rebecca's silver Honda Civic. They checked the parking lots of every business between the beauty school and Rebecca's house. They looked behind buildings, in alleys, and even drove through the residential neighborhoods nearby. The couple stopped at Peterson's gas station, the only business along Rebecca's usual route home. Bill Peterson, the owner, knew Rebecca well because she always bought her coffee there on weekend mornings. He remembered seeing her car drive past around 4:00 p.m., but he hadn't noticed anything unusual. She had been alone in the car and appeared to be talking on her phone. By 8:00 p.m., Marcus and Linda were genuinely frightened. They had called all of Rebecca's friends, but no one had heard from her since school ended. They had driven through every part of Millfield twice, checking anywhere Rebecca might have stopped. Her car was nowhere to be found, and her phone continued going straight to voicemail. At Antonio's restaurant, Tony Marcelli was holding the corner table for Marcus and Rebecca. Other customers were asking to be seated there, but Tony kept insisting it was reserved. He had prepared a special dessert with "Will You Marry Me" written in chocolate sauce. By 9 p.m., he realized the young couple was not coming and sadly threw the dessert away. Linda Stone made the decision to call the police at 9:30 p.m. She had been hoping Rebecca would walk through the door with some reasonable explanation for where she had been. Maybe her car had broken down in an area with no cell phone service. Maybe she had stopped to help someone and lost track of time. But as the hours passed, These explanations seemed less and less likely. Officer James Mitchell arrived at the Stone house at 10:15 p.m. He was a veteran of the Millfield Police Department and had known the Stone family for years. He listened carefully as Linda and Marcus explained what had happened. Under normal circumstances, police departments require a person to be missing for 24 hours before opening an investigation. But Officer Mitchell knew Rebecca personally, and he understood this situation was not normal. "Mrs. Stone, I'm going to be honest with you. This doesn't sound like Rebecca at all. I've known that girl since she was in elementary school, and she's never been the type to worry people like this. I'm going to start making some calls tonight," Officer Mitchell said. By 11 p.m., every police officer in Millfield was looking for Rebecca Stone and her silver Honda Civic. The state police had been notified and Rebecca's information had been entered into the missing persons database. Local hospitals were called to see if anyone matching Rebecca's description had been brought in. As midnight approached on February 14th, what should have been the happiest Valentine's Day of Rebecca Stone's life had become a nightmare for everyone who loved her. Marcus Williams sat in his truck in the Antonio's restaurant parking lot, still wearing his suit and holding the engagement ring he had planned to give her. Linda Stone paced her living room, calling Rebecca's phone every few minutes and praying for an answer that never came. Somewhere in the darkness, Rebecca Stone's silver Honda Civic sat empty and abandoned, holding secrets that would soon turn a missing person case into something much more sinister. The morning of February 15th brought no relief to the Stone family or the people of Millfield. Rebecca had now been missing for almost 18 hours, and the entire town was beginning to realize that something terrible had happened to one of their own. The police department had been flooded with calls from concerned residents offering to help search for the missing young woman. Detective Sarah Reynolds had been called in at dawn to take over the case. She was a 15-year veteran of the Virginia State Police and had extensive experience with missing person investigations. Detective Reynolds was known for her thorough approach and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She understood that the first 48 hours in any disappearance case were critical. The detective's first priority was organizing a proper search. By 7 a.m., over 200 volunteers had gathered at the Millfield Community Center. The group included Rebecca's classmates from beauty school, members of her church, neighbors, and complete strangers who had heard about the case on the local news. Marcus Williams and Robert Stone, Rebecca's father, had driven in from Riverside to help coordinate the search efforts. Detective Reynolds divided the volunteers into teams of 6 people each. She gave each team a specific area to search and provided them with maps, whistles, and Rebecca's photograph. The teams were instructed to look for any sign of Rebecca or her silver Honda Civic. They were told not to touch anything they found, but to immediately call the police if they discovered anything suspicious. The search teams spread out across Millfield and the surrounding countryside. They walked through wooded areas, checked abandoned buildings, and searched along every road and pathway in the county. Local businesses donated food and water for the volunteers, and the community center became the unofficial headquarters for the search operation. Linda Stone sat in the community center throughout the day, surrounded by friends and family members who had come to offer support. She clutched Rebecca's favorite sweater and answered the same questions over and over again from Detective Reynolds and other officers. Every few minutes, she would check her phone, hoping for a call or text message from her daughter. Thomas Bradley was not part of the organized search effort. The 62-year-old man had been fishing the waters around Millfield for over 40 years, and he knew every bend and inlet of the Mill River. Thomas had heard about Rebecca's disappearance on the morning news and decided to check some of the more remote areas along the river that the search teams might miss. Thomas launched his small fishing boat from the dock at Riverside Park just after sunrise. The park was located about 3 miles outside of Millfield and was a popular spot for fishing, picnicking, and boat launching. Thomas had fished these waters countless times and knew them better than almost anyone in the county. As Thomas slowly moved his boat along the shoreline, he was looking for anything that seemed out of place. The morning was cold and foggy, making visibility poor. He had been on the water for about 2 hours when he noticed something strange near the boat ramp at the far end of the park. At first, Thomas thought it might be a large piece of trash or debris that had washed up during the recent rains. But as he moved his boat closer, he realized he was looking at the roof of a car that was partially submerged in the water. The vehicle was about 50 feet from the shore, sitting in water that was roughly 8 feet deep. Thomas immediately called 911 on his cell phone. His hands were shaking as he spoke to the emergency dispatcher. He could see that the car was silver in color, and his heart sank as he remembered the description of Rebecca Stone's missing Honda Civic. He stayed on the water near the submerged vehicle until the police arrived. Detective Reynolds received the call about the submerged car at 11:47 a.m. She immediately drove to Riverside Park with a team of officers and called for the county's dive team to respond to the scene. The area around the boat ramp was quickly secured with yellow police tape, and all civilian boats were ordered to stay away from the area. The dive team arrived within an hour and immediately entered the water to examine the submerged vehicle. The lead diver, Sergeant Mike Harrison, confirmed that the car was indeed a silver Honda Civic, matching the description of Rebecca's missing vehicle. The license plate matched the number that had been broadcast in the missing person alert. As the dive team worked to secure the vehicle for removal from the water, Detective Reynolds began examining the scene around the boat ramp. There were tire tracks leading down to the water's edge, suggesting that the car had been driven into the river rather than accidentally sliding in. The boat ramp was steep enough that a car could easily be driven into deep water. The car was pulled from the river at 3:30 p.m. Water poured out of the doors and windows as it was lifted onto the shore by a heavy-duty tow truck. Detective Reynolds and the crime scene technicians immediately began examining the vehicle while it was still dripping wet. Rebecca's purse was found on the passenger seat, along with her textbooks from beauty school. Her wallet was still inside the purse with her driver's license and credit cards intact. On the floor of the passenger side, investigators found a pair of women's shoes that Linda Stone later identified as belonging to Rebecca. Most importantly, the car was empty. There was no sign of Rebecca inside the vehicle. This discovery brought both relief and increased worry to her family. Rebecca was not trapped in the submerged car, which meant she might still be alive somewhere. But it also meant that someone had taken her from her vehicle and left the car in the river to hide evidence. Detective Reynolds ordered an immediate expansion of the search efforts. If Rebecca's car had been dumped in the river, then Rebecca herself might be somewhere in the surrounding area. Search teams were redirected to focus on the woods and fields around Riverside Park. Every available officer in the county was called in to help with the expanded search. The dive team continued searching the river bottom around where the car had been found. They were looking for any other evidence that might have been thrown into the water. They found Rebecca's cell phone about 20 feet from where the car had been sitting. The phone was completely destroyed by the water and would provide no useful information to investigators. As evening approached on February 15th, the search for Rebecca Stone continued under floodlights that had been set up around Riverside Park. Volunteers worked in shifts throughout the night, refusing to give up hope that Rebecca might still be found alive. The discovery of her empty car had raised more questions than it had answered, but it had also given investigators their first real clue about what had happened to the missing young woman. Linda Stone received the news about her daughter's car with mixed emotions. She was grateful that Rebecca had not drowned in the submerged vehicle, but she was terrified about what might have happened to her daughter. As she sat in the community center waiting for news, Linda Stone could only pray that Rebecca was still alive somewhere and that someone would find her soon. The search for Rebecca Stone was no longer just a missing person case. It had become a race against time to find a young woman who had clearly become the victim of a serious crime. The sun was just beginning to rise on February 18th when search dog Duke and his handler, Helen Martinez, made the discovery that everyone had been hoping they would never find. Duke was a German shepherd trained specifically for search and rescue operations, and he had been working with Helen for over 6 years. The two had helped find missing people across Virginia, but they had never worked on a case that had affected them as deeply as the search for Rebecca Stone. Helen and Duke had been searching a wooded area about 2 miles from Riverside Park, where Rebecca's car had been found. The area was thick with trees and undergrowth, making it difficult for the larger search teams to cover thoroughly. Helen trusted Duke's nose more than any technology, and the dog had been acting strangely for the past hour, picking up a scent that seemed to excite and worry him at the same time. At 6:23 a.m., Duke led Helen to a small clearing that was partially hidden by fallen trees and thick bushes. The dog began barking and pawing at a pile of branches and leaves that looked like it had been deliberately arranged. Helen immediately called for Detective Reynolds on her radio, her voice shaking as she spoke. Detective Reynolds arrived at the scene within minutes, followed by the county medical examiner Dr. Amanda Foster and a team of crime scene technicians. They carefully removed the branches and leaves that had been covering Rebecca Stone's body. It was immediately clear that Rebecca had been the victim of a violent crime. Dr. Foster conducted her initial examination of the scene before Rebecca's body was moved. She could see signs of severe trauma and ligature marks around Rebecca's neck and wrists. The condition of the body and the way it had been concealed suggested that Rebecca had been dead for several days, likely since the night she disappeared. The crime scene was secured with a wide perimeter, and all unauthorized personnel were ordered to stay away from the area. Crime scene photographers took hundreds of pictures from every possible angle. Every piece of potential evidence was carefully collected and labeled. The investigation had now officially become a homicide case. Detective Reynolds faced the difficult task of informing Rebecca's family about the discovery. She drove to the Stone house on Maple Street, where Linda Stone had been waiting for news about her daughter for 4 agonizing days. Marcus Williams was there as well, along with several family friends and Rebecca's father, Robert Stone. Linda Stone knew what the detective was going to tell her before she even spoke. She had seen the look on Detective Reynolds' face and understood that her worst fears had come true. The news that Rebecca had been found dead devastated everyone who loved her. The young woman who had brought so much joy and kindness into the world was gone forever. Dr. Foster conducted the official autopsy later that day at the county medical examiner's office. Her findings confirmed what the crime scene had already suggested. Rebecca Stone had died from strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The injuries indicated that Rebecca had fought hard against her attacker and had suffered for an extended period before she died. The autopsy revealed other disturbing details that Detective Reynolds kept from the family. There was evidence that Rebecca had been held captive for some time before she was killed. The rope marks on her wrists showed that she had been bound, and there were defensive wounds on her hands and arms that proved she had tried to fight off her attacker. Detective Reynolds assembled a task force to investigate Rebecca's murder. The team included detectives from 3 different counties, crime scene specialists, and FBI profilers who specialized in violent crimes. They set up a command center at the Millfield Police Department and began the systematic process of investigating every aspect of Rebecca's life. The first step was to examine Rebecca's personal relationships and daily routines. Detective Reynolds and her team interviewed everyone who knew Rebecca, starting with her family and closest friends. They talked to her classmates at the Valley Beauty Institute, her co-workers at the animal shelter, and every person who had regular contact with her. Marcus Williams was interviewed multiple times, which was standard procedure in any homicide investigation. The boyfriend or husband was always considered a potential suspect until they could be eliminated through evidence and alibis. Marcus understood this and cooperated fully with the investigation, even though being questioned about Rebecca's murder was emotionally devastating for him. Marcus provided investigators with a detailed timeline of his activities on February 14th. He had worked at the hardware store until 6 p.m., and several customers and co-workers confirmed seeing him there. Security cameras at the store showed him working normally throughout the day. His cell phone records confirmed that he had spoken to Rebecca at 3:30 p.m. and had not called or texted her again after that conversation. Detective Reynolds also arranged for Marcus to take a polygraph test. The test was administered by an experienced FBI examiner who specialized in criminal investigations. Marcus passed the polygraph examination without any signs of deception. Combined with his solid alibi and the lack of any motive, Marcus was eliminated as a suspect in Rebecca's murder. Robert Stone, Rebecca's father, was also interviewed and cleared as a suspect. He had been at work in Riverside on February 14th, and his co-workers confirmed his presence there throughout the day. Robert's relationship with his daughter had been loving and supportive, and there was no evidence of any conflict between them. The investigation team then focused on Rebecca's daily routine and the people she encountered regularly. They obtained security camera footage from every business along Rebecca's normal route between home and the beauty school. They interviewed gas station attendants, store clerks, and anyone else who might have seen Rebecca on a regular basis. Fear. Valley Beauty Institute became a major focus of the investigation. Detective Reynolds and her team interviewed every student and instructor at the school. They wanted to know if Rebecca had mentioned feeling threatened or uncomfortable around anyone. They also wanted to identify any students or staff members who might have shown unusual interest in Rebecca. Most of the interviews revealed the same information. Rebecca was well liked by everyone at the school. She was friendly and helpful to other students, and the instructors considered her one of their most promising pupils. No one could think of anyone who might want to hurt Rebecca or who had shown inappropriate interest in her. However, several students mentioned that there was one male student who had asked Rebecca out multiple times, despite being told that she had a boyfriend. The student's name was David Carter, and he was 28 years old. Several classmates said that David seemed to have trouble accepting Rebecca's rejection, and that he had continued to try to talk to her even after she made it clear she wasn't interested. Detective Reynolds immediately wanted to interview David Carter. She discovered that he had not been attending classes since February 15th, the day after Rebecca disappeared. When she contacted the school's attendance office, she learned that David had called in sick for the past 4 days, but had not provided any specific information about his illness. The detective obtained David Carter's address from the school records and drove to his apartment complex on the outskirts of Millfield. David lived in a small, run-down building that housed mostly single people and college students. When Detective Reynolds knocked on his door, there was no answer. The building manager told her that David had been seen around the building recently, but had been keeping to himself more than usual. Detective Reynolds decided that David Carter needed to be interviewed as soon as possible. She put out a request for all patrol officers to watch for David and to contact him if they saw him anywhere in the county. She also began the process of obtaining a search warrant for David's apartment, though she would need more evidence before a judge would approve the warrant. As the investigation entered its 5th day, Detective Reynolds knew that time was working against her. Evidence could be destroyed, witnesses could forget important details, and suspects could flee the area. She was determined to solve Rebecca Stone's murder quickly, but she also knew that she needed to be thorough and careful to make sure that the real killer was caught and brought to justice. The people of Millfield were living in fear, knowing that someone in their community had committed a brutal murder. Parents were keeping their children closer to home, and young women were afraid to go anywhere alone. The sense of safety and security that had always defined their small town had been shattered by Rebecca Stone's death. Detective Sarah Reynolds received the phone call she had been waiting for at 7:30 a.m. on February 22nd. Officer Kevin Burke had spotted David Carter at a gas station on Highway 15, about 10 miles outside of Millfield. Carter was filling up a dark blue sedan and appeared to be preparing for a long trip. Officer Burke was keeping his distance and waiting for instructions. Detective Reynolds immediately drove to the gas station with backup officers. She wanted to approach David Carter carefully, without causing a scene that might make him run or become violent. As she pulled into the gas station parking lot, she could see Carter inside the convenience store paying for his gas and buying supplies that looked like he was planning to leave town. David Carter was 28 years old and looked older than his age. He was tall and thin with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that appeared to have been growing for several days. He wore old jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, and he moved in a nervous, jumpy way that immediately made Detective Reynolds suspicious. When Carter walked out of the store, Detective Reynolds approached him calmly and identified herself as a police officer. She explained that she was investigating the disappearance and death of Rebecca Stone and would like to ask him some questions. Carter immediately became defensive and asked if he was under arrest. "I'm not arresting you, Mr. Carter. I just need to talk to you about Rebecca Stone. You were classmates at the beauty school, and I'm talking to everyone who knew her," Detective Reynolds said in a calm, professional voice. Carter agreed to answer some questions, but he seemed extremely nervous and kept looking around the parking lot as if he was planning to run. Detective Reynolds asked him about his relationship with Rebecca and whether he had seen her on February 14th, the day she disappeared. I barely knew her. We were in some of the same classes, but we never really talked much. I haven't been to school since I got sick last week, Carter said. But his story didn't match the information Detective Reynolds had received from other students. The detective knew that several classmates had told her about Carter asking Rebecca out multiple times and not accepting her rejections. She decided to confront him with this information to see how he would respond. That's interesting, Mr. Carter, because several students told me that you had asked Rebecca out on several occasions. They said you seemed pretty interested in getting to know her better, Detective Reynolds said, watching Carter's reaction carefully. Carter's demeanor changed immediately. He became angry and started talking fast, claiming that the other students were lying about him. He said that Rebecca was stuck up and thought she was too good for him. His anger seemed out of proportion to the situation, and Detective Reynolds knew she needed to get Carter to the police station for a more thorough interview. Mr. Carter, I think it would be better if we continued this conversation at the police station. You're not under arrest, but I need to ask you some more detailed questions, Detective Reynolds said. Carter initially refused to go to the police station, but when Detective Reynolds explained that she could arrest him if necessary, he agreed to follow her there in his own car. She made sure that 2 patrol cars escorted Carter to make sure he didn't try to escape along the way. At the police station, Detective Reynolds began a formal interview with David Carter. She read him his rights and asked if he wanted a lawyer present. Carter said he didn't need a lawyer because he hadn't done anything wrong. This was exactly what Detective Reynolds had hoped he would say. The interview room at the Millfield Police Department was small and uncomfortable, with cameras recording everything that was said. Detective Reynolds began by asking Carter to provide a detailed account of his activities on February 14th and the days that followed. Carter claimed that he had been at home sick with the flu since February 14th. He said he had not left his apartment except to go to the grocery store and the pharmacy. When Detective Reynolds asked for specific details about what he had bought and when, Carter's story began to fall apart. You said you went to the pharmacy, Mr. Carter. Which pharmacy did you go to, and what did you buy there? Detective Reynolds asked. Carter hesitated and then said he couldn't remember which pharmacy he had gone to. He also couldn't remember what medicine he had bought or when he had made the trip. His answers became more and more vague as Detective Reynolds pressed him for details. Detective Reynolds then showed Carter the security camera footage from the Valley Beauty Institute parking lot. The footage clearly showed Carter's dark blue sedan leaving the parking lot just minutes after Rebecca's silver Honda Civic. Carter claimed that this was just a coincidence and that he had left school early because he was feeling sick. It's interesting. Timing, Mr. Carter. Rebecca left the parking lot and then you left just a few minutes later. Did you follow her car when you left school that day? Detective Reynolds asked. Carter denied following Rebecca, but he was becoming more nervous and agitated. He started sweating and his hands were shaking. Detective Reynolds could tell that he was hiding something important, and she decided to take a different approach. David, I think you really cared about Rebecca. I think you wanted to get to know her better. And maybe things got out of hand. Sometimes these situations happen and the person never meant for anyone to get hurt, Detective Reynolds said in a softer voice. This approach seemed to make Carter even more uncomfortable. He started talking about how Rebecca had been mean to him and had embarrassed him in front of other students. He said that she thought she was better than him just because she had a boyfriend and came from a nice family. Detective Reynolds realized that Carter harbored significant resentment toward Rebecca. She could see that his feelings about Rebecca were much stronger than he had initially admitted. She decided it was time to ask for a DNA sample and to get a search warrant for Carter's apartment. Mr. Carter, would you be willing to provide a DNA sample to help us eliminate you as a suspect in this case? It's a simple procedure that would help us focus our investigation in the right direction, Detective Reynolds said. Carter initially agreed to provide the DNA sample, but then changed his mind and said he wanted to talk to a lawyer first. This was another red flag for Detective Reynolds. Innocent people typically didn't have a problem providing DNA samples to help solve a murder case. While Carter was being held at the police station, Detective Reynolds obtained a search warrant for his apartment. The warrant was approved based on Carter's suspicious behavior, his connection to Rebecca, and the security camera footage showing his car leaving school shortly after Rebecca's car. The search of Carter's apartment revealed evidence that shocked even the experienced investigators. The walls of Carter's bedroom were covered with photographs of Rebecca that he had taken secretly around town and at school. There were pictures of her walking to her car, sitting in the student lounge, and even some that appeared to have been taken from outside her house. In a drawer beside Carter's bed, investigators found a detailed notebook containing information about Rebecca's daily schedule and habits. Carter had been watching Rebecca for months, recording what time she arrived at school, what time she left, where she went for lunch, and who she talked to. The notebook read like the diary of a stalker who had been planning something for a long time. Most damning of all was the physical evidence found in Carter's apartment and car. Crime scene technicians discovered traces of Rebecca's DNA on clothing in Carter's bedroom. Fibers from Rebecca's jacket were found in the trunk of his car. A piece of rope found in his closet was consistent with the ligature marks found on Rebecca's wrists and neck. When Detective Reynolds confronted Carter with this evidence, his story changed completely. He claimed that Rebecca had come to his apartment willingly and that her death had been an accident during what he called a romantic encounter. He said he had panicked and hidden her body because he was afraid no one would believe his story. Detective Reynolds knew that Carter was lying. The evidence showed that Rebecca had been held captive and had fought desperately against her attacker. The injuries to her body were consistent with torture and prolonged abuse, not an accidental death during a consensual encounter. David Carter was formally arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murder of Rebecca Stone. As he was being led away in handcuffs, he finally broke down and began crying. But Detective Reynolds felt no sympathy for the man who had taken the life of such a bright and promising young woman. The people of Millfield could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that Rebecca's killer had been caught. But for Rebecca's family and friends, Carter's arrest was just the beginning of a long journey toward justice and healing. The courthouse in Millfield had never seen anything like the crowds that gathered for the trial of David Carter in the fall of 2018. People began lining up outside the building at dawn each day, hoping to get one of the limited seats in the courtroom. The case had captured the attention of not just the local community, but people from across Virginia who had followed the story of Rebecca Stone's tragic death. Linda Stone sat in the front row of the courtroom every day of the trial, surrounded by family members and friends who had supported her through the darkest months of her life. She wore a small pin with Rebecca's photograph on her jacket, and she carried a framed picture of her daughter in her purse. Marcus Williams sat beside her, still wearing the engagement ring he had planned to give Rebecca on what should have been the happiest Valentine's Day of their lives. The prosecutor in the case was District Attorney Michelle Grant, a tough and experienced lawyer who had been handling violent crime cases for over 20 years. She had carefully prepared her case against David Carter, organizing the evidence in a way that would tell the complete story of Rebecca's kidnapping and murder. She was determined to get justice for Rebecca and her family. Carter's defense attorney was Public Defender James Morrison, who faced the difficult task of defending a client whose guilt seemed obvious to everyone in the community. Morrison's strategy was to argue that Carter suffered from mental illness and was not fully responsible for his actions. He planned to present evidence of Carter's troubled childhood and his history of depression and social isolation. The trial began with District Attorney Grant's opening statement, in which she laid out the timeline of Rebecca's disappearance and death. She explained how Carter had become obsessed with Rebecca over a period of months, stalking her and recording her daily activities in his notebook. She described how Carter had followed Rebecca from school on Valentine's Day and had somehow forced her to stop her car. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that David Carter planned and carried out the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Rebecca Stone. This was not a crime of passion or an accident. This was the deliberate and calculated action of a man who had become dangerously obsessed with a young woman who wanted nothing to do with him, Grant said. The prosecutor's case was built on the physical evidence found in Carter's apartment and car, the security camera footage from the beauty school, and the testimony of Rebecca's classmates who had witnessed Carter's inappropriate behavior toward her. Each piece of evidence was presented methodically, building a picture of Carter as a dangerous stalker who had escalated to murder. Dr. Amanda Foster, the medical examiner, provided some of the most difficult testimony of the trial. She explained Rebecca's injuries in clinical terms, describing how the young woman had suffered before she died. Her testimony was so disturbing that several jurors were seen wiping away tears, and Linda Stone had to leave the courtroom temporarily. The security camera footage from the Valley Beauty Institute was played for the jury, showing Rebecca walking to her car for the last time, and Carter following just minutes later. The footage was silent, but it spoke volumes about Carter's behavior and his decision to follow Rebecca that day. Detective Sarah Reynolds testified about the investigation and Carter's behavior when he was questioned. She described how Carter's story had changed multiple times and how he had initially lied about his relationship with Rebecca. She also presented the evidence found in Carter's apartment, including the photographs he had secretly taken of Rebecca and the notebook documenting her daily activities. The most powerful testimony came from Rebecca's classmates at the beauty school. Several young women took the stand to describe Carter's persistent efforts to ask Rebecca out and his angry reaction when she repeatedly rejected him. They painted a picture of a man who could not accept rejection and who had become increasingly fixated on Rebecca over time. Rebecca was always polite to David, even when he made her uncomfortable, testified Jennifer Walsh, one of Rebecca's closest friends at school. She never wanted to hurt anyone's feelings, but you could tell that his attention bothered her. She started asking friends to walk with her to the parking lot because she didn't want to be alone around him. Defense attorney Morrison presented his case by calling psychologists and psychiatrists who testified about Carter's mental state. They described his history of depression, social anxiety, and inability to form normal relationships with women. They argued that Carter's mental illness had impaired his judgment and made him unable to understand the seriousness of his actions. Carter himself took the stand in his own defense, a risky decision that surprised many legal observers. Speaking in a quiet voice, he claimed that he had never meant to hurt Rebecca and that her death had been an accident. He said he had only wanted to talk to her and convince her to give him a chance. I just wanted her to see that I was a good person. I thought if I could just talk to her alone without all her friends around, she would understand that I really cared about her, Carter testified, avoiding eye contact with Rebecca's family. District Attorney Grant's cross-examination of Carter was devastating. She forced him to admit that he had been stalking Rebecca for months and that he had lied repeatedly to police about his involvement in her disappearance. She confronted him with the evidence of Rebecca's prolonged suffering and asked him to explain how that could have been an accident. Mr. Carter, you took photographs of Rebecca without her knowledge. You followed her around town and recorded her daily activities. You held her captive for hours before you killed her. Does any of that sound like the behavior of someone who just wanted to talk? Grant asked. Carter's answers became increasingly confused and contradictory. He could not explain the evidence found in his apartment or the injuries that Rebecca had suffered. His testimony only served to reinforce the prosecution's case that he was a dangerous predator who had planned Rebecca's kidnapping and murder. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before reaching their verdict. When the foreman stood to announce their decision, the courtroom was completely silent. We find the defendant, David Carter, guilty of kidnapping in the first degree. We find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. We find the defendant guilty of stalking. Linda Stone collapsed into tears when the verdict was read. For the first time since Rebecca's death, she felt that some measure of justice had been achieved. Marcus Williams put his arms around her as they both wept for the young woman they had loved and lost. Judge Patricia Hayes sentenced David Carter to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In announcing the sentence, she noted the particularly heinous nature of the crime and the impact it had on Rebecca's family and the community. Mr. Carter, you have taken the life of a bright, kind, and promising young woman who had everything to live for. Your actions have caused immeasurable pain to her family and friends and have robbed the world of someone who would have made it a better place. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, and that is exactly what you deserve, Judge Hayes said. The Rebecca Stone case had a lasting impact on Millfield and the surrounding area. The Valley Beauty Institute implemented new security measures, including better lighting in the parking lot and a policy requiring staff to escort students to their cars after dark. Local high schools began offering programs about stalking and personal safety. Linda Stone channeled her grief into helping other families who had lost loved ones to violence. She established the Rebecca Stone Foundation, which provides support to families of murder victims and funds programs to educate young people about recognizing and avoiding dangerous situations. Marcus Williams struggled with survivors' guilt and depression for months after the trial. He eventually moved away from Millfield, unable to cope with the memories that surrounded him there. He kept Rebecca's engagement ring and her photograph, but he never married. The love of his life had been taken from him before they could begin their future together. The Rebecca Stone Memorial Scholarship was established to help young women from low-income families pursue careers in cosmetology and other fields. Each year, the scholarship helped several students achieve their dreams, just as Rebecca had been working toward her own dreams when her life was cut short. David Carter began serving his life sentence at a maximum security prison in Virginia. He made several appeals of his conviction, all of which were denied by higher courts. He will never be eligible for parole and will spend the rest of his life behind bars, paying for the terrible crime he committed against an innocent young woman. The people of Millfield slowly began to heal from the trauma of Rebecca's murder, but they never forgot the bright young woman who had brought so much joy to their community. Her memory lives on in the scholarship that bears her name, in the safety programs that were created in her honor, and in the hearts of all who knew and loved her. Rebecca Stone's story serves as a tragic reminder that evil can strike anywhere, and that we must all remain vigilant in protecting ourselves and those we love. But it also reminds us that even in the face of terrible tragedy, communities can come together to support each other and to ensure that good can triumph over evil, even when the price of that victory is far too high.